All right, welcome everyone. I am Amy Kurtz-Lansing, and I am the curator here at the Florence Griswold Museum in Old Lyme, Connecticut. Thank you so much for joining us today for the final session of our home improvement series this spring, which has been themed Innovation, Inclusion, and Inspiration. And we'll focus this week on spreading the word about your programs beyond your site. This will be a 90-minute program consisting of 2 presentations followed by a moderated discussion among the presenters. And please note, since this is a webinar presentation, all participants are muted, but if you'd like to ask a question, you can put that in the Q&A feature, and we will answer as many of those as we can near the end of the program. As you saw a minute ago, this program is also being recorded, and you will get a link to the recording and a follow-up email. So here at the Florence Griswold Museum, where we are a founding member of Historic Artists' Homes and Studios, we are thrilled to partner with the National Trust and with the HAHS program to bring you this speaker series each year. Valerie Ballant, who is the director of Historic Artists' Homes and Studios, is our co-host today, and she is going to tell us a few words about HAHS. Valerie?
Thank you, Amy, and welcome all to our last session of this year's Home Improvement Series, where we have had the pleasure of learning about some very innovative projects happening across the HAHS network, and today is going to be no exception. As I've mentioned in previous weeks, Historic Artists' Homes and Studios has enjoyed hosting for this 3rd year this series in partnership with the Florence Griswold Museum as part of National Preservation Month. Historic Artists' Homes and Studios, which we often refer to by our acronym HAHS, is a membership of 61 sites across 25 states throughout the country that were all the former homes and studios of visual artists. And HAHS is a program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And as Amy mentioned, the Florence Griswold has been a valued member since the program began in 1999. In 2020, we released a printed guidebook, which serves as a wonderful introduction to this program and our member site. It is available through our publisher, Princeton Architectural Press, and at all major retailers, and we will put a link into the chat. In our current work, HAHS is committed to increasing diversity within our membership to include more artists and preserved sites associated with those traditionally underrepresented in art history. And this includes women, LGBTQ, Indigenous, Latinx, African American, and Asian American and Pacific Islander artists. Just in case you need a reminder, this month, May, specifically celebrates the contributions of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Our work to tell a truer story of our nation's site-specific art history continues, and I'm excited that today we are going to highlight projects at sites preserving legacies of 3 very influential and impactful sculptors, including the site of African-American artist James W. Washington, whose home and studio in Seattle was accepted into the HAHS membership last year. A core part of HAHS is to foster peer learning and exchange among its member sites, and to provide opportunities to learn from one another by highlighting projects that are currently happening at HAHS sites. And for this reason, we conceived as home improvement as a series of project case studies rather than virtual tours or presentations of historic narrative. But another key goal is to invite our public audiences into dialogues that are often restricted to conversations that happen among professional peers. As Amy mentioned, this year we've been discovering some unique ways in which sites and collections can be highlighted in new ways to engage more diverse audiences. And today's session focuses on complex projects that extend the reach of these preserved spaces and stories beyond the boundaries of the physical site. And we will learn how collections and narratives can be re-examined through traveling exhibitions, artist residencies, and their resulting publications. And our presenters are going to illustrate how these types of projects are initially conceived, how, of course, they continue to evolve, and the varied impacts that they have as these projects then ultimately come to fruition. But perhaps most importantly, these projects illustrate how these artists, these places, and collections offer distinct ways to honor artistic legacy, while also remaining relevant to issues and discussions that are in our lives today. I'm delighted, of course, to be hosting this series in collaboration with the Florence Griswold Museum. As many know, in Florence Griswold's own era, that boarding house, which is a centerpiece of the site, was a place for active conversations among hundreds of artists. So today, the museum is the perfect partner for this series with HAHS. My thanks to our speakers today and our other participants and the entire staff here at the Florence Griswold Museum, and particularly David Rao, Director of Education and Outreach, Tammy Flynn, Director of Marketing, and my co-host, Curator Amy Kurtz-Lansing, who will introduce our first speaker. Amy.
Thank you, Valerie. Our first speaker is Rick Kendall, who is the superintendent at the Saint-Gaudens National Historical Park in Cornish, New Hampshire. And you can go ahead and move your slide to your first. He's going to be discussing Take Your Show on the Road, Traveling Exhibitions, and Expanding Your Audience. And I will put Rick's bio in the chat. Go ahead, Rick.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Valerie. And thank you all. I'm pleased to be here today for this presentation. And I'm also glad to be accompanied by my colleague, Dana Pilson, who's the curatorial researcher and collections manager at Chesterwood, who will be joining us for the Q&A portion. So over the past several decades, the Saint-Gaudens National Historical Park has planned and implemented several different traveling exhibitions that have gone around both the United States and Europe. And the most recent example tour that we can point to is 2002, so more than 20 years ago. 20 years later, we felt that the time was ripe to start thinking about another opportunity to travel with the collection, and been kicking around different ideas for how to make that happen. And in 2019, the Historic Artist Homes and Studios program hosted its semi-annual conference at Chesterwood, which I attended with our now retired curator, Henry Duffy. And though we had both, Henry and I, been to Chesterwood before, we were really struck by how similar our sites are, the Saint-Gaudens National Historical Park and Chesterwood. And, our collections were similar. And really on the drive home, we began scheming about how we might work together to, hook Chesterwood into this idea of doing a joint exhibition. So we did some further research, and it really revealed that Saint-Gaudens and French, though they were contemporaries during their own times, and really unquestionably two of the great names in late 19th and early 20th century sculpture, they'd never actually been the subject of a joint exhibition before. So there seemed to be a real nexus there. So after taking a few weeks to build our business case, we reached out to Donna Hassler, who is now the director emerita at Chesterwood. And we shared our experience with traveling exhibits at Saint-Gaudens and discussed some of the challenges and some of the benefits. And ultimately, we all agreed to work together on this project, and we began the effort to try and hook an organizer for our program. So we considered, I talked right through my second slide. So we considered several different companies as organizers, but we decided to make our first approach to the American Federation of Arts. A lot of other exhibit design firms seem to be focusing more on mass appeal exhibits with a real strong pop culture hook, like the furnishings of Downton Abbey or Sherlock Holmes, the exhibition. And AFA seemed to be more interested in focusing on storylines that were more in line with what we were trying to advance and were perhaps a little less contrived. AFA, the American Federation of Arts, is really a leader in organizing traveling art exhibitions. They were established in 1909, so they've been doing this for a very long time. And they're a nonprofit organization, which appealed to us and provided some alignment as both a government museum at Saint-Gaudens and a nonprofit entity at Chesterwood. So in March of 2020, just a few short days before New York City began to shut down due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Park Service folks and Chesterwood folks headed to New York City to meet at AFA's office to make the pitch to, to their Director of Curatorial Affairs, Andrew Eschelbacher. And Andrew was really excited about the concept and our pitch. agreed to help us make the pitch to the AFA board for AFA to coordinate this exhibition. And a few months later, the board approved the concept, and we really began at that point the planning. And Donna Hassler was joined at that point by Dana Pilson, and the four of us, along with Andrew Eschelbacher, really became the initial curatorial team for this effort. So the partnership between AFA and the co-organizers, once AFA accepts a project under its wing to coordinate, they bring a considerable amount of experience to bear on the effort. It doesn't mean that they do all the work. By all means, the institutions that are organizing a traveling exhibit really should prepare for some heavy lifting. But the agreement with them covers a significant number of add-ons that really prepare institutions for the traveling exhibit. We came into this with a concept in mind for a story I think we were interested in telling, but AFA really has their finger on the pulse of what art museums are typically looking for in a traveling exhibit, since they have to try and sell these exhibits many, many times each year. And they help craft that exhibit narrative to appeal to multiple audiences. And as co-organizers, Chesterwood and Saint-Gaudens were instrumental in developing the exhibit checklist of the objects that'll travel. And you can see the first three objects on our checklist on the screen here. And AFA was a key partner in reviewing that list for gaps and for identifying potentially other institutions who might be willing to lend to the exhibition, and also arranging for and securing the loans from those institutions for additional objects to join the exhibition. AFA provides a lot. If they accept the project, they provide a lot to make this possible, which is great, because as two small sites, we would have struggled to do it all on our own. AFA produces an exhibition catalog for each exhibit that they coordinate. And these are beautiful, full color, hardbound records of the exhibition that include essays and other new scholarship. Exhibit organizers may be asked to contribute one or more essays or recommend other authors for essays. It's a really professional quality catalog that's an important art historical record. And therefore, the amount of review and editing and other preparations for the catalog are really significant. But what you come out with at the end is also a really significant document. As part of the catalog preparation, AFA pays for new photography of all of the objects in the exhibition. So for sculpture, the photography process can take several weeks, moving and lighting objects to their best advantage. And of course, some of these objects are quite large and not easily moved. But when the photos are complete and processed, they're available for our institutions to use for other purposes, which is a real benefit for us as institutions. AFA's project budget also includes line items for conservation of collections items that will be traveling, and this can include things like light cleaning or some preventative care like waxing, or it can include full conservation repair of broken pieces of sculptures. So the opportunity to complete what amounts to free conservation work is another real positive benefit for participating institutions. And AFA also maintains a budget line item for frames and mounts and other presentation materials for the exhibition, which again, the institutions keep once the exhibition closes, since many of them are designed specifically for the objects that we are traveling. And then finally, the AFA budget includes a cash payment to the organizers to cover incidental costs that we may incur in preparing for the exhibition. And it's negotiated as part of the co-organization agreement, so it may change from exhibit to exhibit, but for us at least, we use some of the funds to pay for a condition assessment and preparation of a condition binder that would ultimately travel to all of the venues with our objects. In addition, AFA leads most of the logistics for the exhibit. They also work hard to try and place the exhibition at venues, creating an exhibition website, while also making dozens of cold calls to institutions to pitch the exhibition to them. And we now have 4 venues signed up for our exhibition in Alabama, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, and Iowa. And I think we can probably get you a really good deal if you have an open slot on your calendars at your institutions for later this year for venue number 2. And then AFA coordinates the survey and the crating and the shipping of the exhibition with art handlers that the organizers all agree upon and feel comfortable with. So on the ground coordination of packing and shipping, as Dana and I well know, falls with the organizers, but AFA is there to handle logistics. And the organizers at AFA's expense also send representatives to each of the installs at different venues so that we can sort of monitor object handling requirements and such. And AFA also sends their registrar to those installs and de-installs. Some of the heavy lifts that organizations can expect if they decide to give one of these traveling exhibitions a go. One of the most intensive areas of focus, I would say, for us was the writing of labels and other didactic materials for the exhibition. Other than the objects themselves, these labels are the materials that really tell the story of the exhibition. And we committed to making our labels only 75 words long or less, since that's about the maximum amount that visitors are apt to read as they're working their way through an exhibition. So it's challenging to carry a narrative with such a small word count, but we gave it a go, and I feel like we did pretty well. And we also included some outside voices with perspectives from beyond the curatorial team in our didactics also. And then another challenge is that each museum's galleries and display capacities are different. So while we write the didactics and figure out in our heads where pieces might go in a space, the way that museums display the exhibition may need to change based upon what their space constraints are for their gallery spaces. So there's a process for venues to work with the curatorial team to ensure that deviations from the curator's intent don't really impact the narrative being advanced. But that was a significant challenge for us as a curatorial team to sort of wrap our heads around. Challenges and costs. We've shared a lot of positives. That doesn't mean the process wasn't without hiccups and setbacks, although it was, I would say, largely positive. We really did, I think, appreciate AFA's nonprofit status, but that does mean that as a nonprofit, they actually have to fundraise to accomplish some of their work. And we had plans to engage a scholars roundtable to help scope the stories that were told by the exhibit, and also develop some additional wraparound programming. But ultimately, the grant for that component was not awarded, which actually served to constrain and further focus our vision a little bit. And then, as you can see on the map here, there's hundreds upon hundreds of art museums in the world, but finding 4 venues to take the exhibition was a surprising challenge. And that was partly, I think, because venues were still sort of figuring out what the post-COVID world would look like for them. Would they even be able to open when we first put this out there as a potential thing for them to consider hosting? And then partly because sculpture exhibitions, I think, are expensive with shipping and handling requirements and such. Dozens and dozens of calls were required before we had signed on 4 venues, and seeing how hard it was to get those venues to take a product that we as a team were working really hard to create and make engaging was sometimes maybe a little bit disheartening, but I'm glad we got it across the finish line. And then I'd say another hurdle was that over the course of a 3-year planning period, our curatorial team experienced some upheaval. We had 2 members of our team retire during the 3 years of planning. Our AFA project manager took a new job, and then our replacement AFA project manager took a new job. And I think Dana and I are the only 2 remaining members of the original curatorial team that are still in our roles that we were in when we started this. So that was, there were some harrowing moments in there for that reason. But why would we do something like this? What is the cost to our institution, and why would we want to volunteer ourselves for this level of work? I would say that for all of the work and the benefits that AFA provides, they do the technical assistance, booking venues, conservation, photography, mounts and frames, cash payment for intangibles. There's actually no cost to the co-organizers, the organizing institutions, other than their staff time and any requirements that those organizations may prescribe that aren't included in the co-organization agreement with AFA. So all costs for the exhibition itself are paid for by venue fees that AFA charges to venues who have signed on to host the exhibition. So in general, the more venues that sign on, the more costs can be distributed among the venues and the lower the individual venue cost will be. But other than staff support time that you would normally pay for through salaries and the gray hairs that have come in over the course of the last 3 years, the cost to the organizers not covered by the venues through AFA are pretty minimal. And then the benefits. Why did we travel our collections, and why should other museums consider doing so as well? Well, Saint-Gaudens and Chesterwood are small sites, and they don't bring in huge number of visitors during the 6-month summer season that we're open. Chesterwood attracts some 15,000 visitors each summer, while Saint-Gaudens attracts 35,000 or so. And while those numbers do fluctuate, we're not likely to see them double or triple in a given year. And since visitation tends to be fairly static, a great way of building new constituency and reaching new audiences is by taking parts of our sites directly to those new audiences in different parts of the country. And that was one of the key elements of our initial push in our initial business case. Our sites are in Massachusetts and Connecticut. Much of our visitation comes from New England, and the exhibition is traveling to Alabama and Tennessee, Pennsylvania, and Iowa. These are all states and regions that don't have deep connections to Augusta Saint-Gaudens or Daniel Chester French. So we stand to introduce these audiences and their works and our sites to entirely new audiences through this exhibition. And then finally, as managers of sites that are dedicated to preserving the art and memory of a particular artist, part of our mission is to keep those artists and their works relevant in the public eye and periodically reevaluate their works in light of new trends and scholarship and art history. And while we do this at our sites regularly through tours and programming and seminars and things like that, traveling exhibits like this provide us with an opportunity to do so in front of a different and in some cases a much larger audience. And this effort is helped and enhanced by new scholars and new voices that record our growing understanding of these artists and their works and their continued relevance to artists today. So it's been a wild ride and a lot of fun, and the exhibition opens in exactly 11 days at its debut venue, the Jewel Collins Smith Museum in Auburn, Alabama. And if you happen to be in the area down there, I hope you will pop in and give it a look. And with that, I thank you for your time and your attention. I look forward to hearing your questions later in this session, and I will yield the floor.
Thank you, Rick. Your talk wonderfully illustrated the opportunities that can come from an embarking on an exhibition of this scale, but also walking through what the realities of what it means and what this type of project entails, and how an external partner such as the AFA can be really instrumental in putting this type of traveling show within reach of sites within the HAHS network. And it gave our public audience today a peek into the multifaceted components that are involved in creating an exhibition. And this partnership between Saint-Gaudens site and Chesterwood, I think, beautifully demonstrates how sites can collaborate and sort of cross-educate, but also, as you pointed out, the interconnectedness that so often existed between these artists in their own eras, and using contemporary tools and programming to re-amplify that. Shows like this provide new opportunities for discovery and understanding of these artists and their artwork, but as you aptly pointed out, serve as a complement and an enhancement to the more immersive experience that is the hallmark of actually visiting each of these sites. And by presenting these sculptures and the artists in dialogue, you also introduce new voices and perspectives through those catalog essays and other didactics. And that demonstrates, as you say, the continued contemporary relevance of these talented creatives and why it's so important to preserve the sites where they created this work. But this is just one of the ways in which a bridge between the past and present can be created through HAHS sites. And as we move into our next presentation, We're incredibly excited to bring into this conversation the lens of a living artist who can personally speak to the power of place she felt and responded to through an artist residency at HAHS member site, the former home, studio, and artist designed landscape of sculptor, poet, painter, activist, all around creative, James W. Washington in Seattle. And while Ms. Carletta Carrington Wilson's formal residency at this site took place over a 1-month period in 2011, as she will demonstrate in her own presentation, her relationship to the artist, this place, this magical place, and her own artistic journey in response can be traced to an earlier genesis and frankly, a continuing exploration. And so we are delighted to have Carletta Carrington Wilson here with us this afternoon to cap off Home Improvement 2023 with her talk entitled "The House Stands Firm, the Creation of Home of Stone and Bone." Welcome, Carletta.
Thank you, Valerie. Can you hear me?
We can, and we can see your slides.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate this opportunity to share more of the story that I have about Mr. Washington. Actually, it's not just a story, it's kind of an adventure, an artistic adventure. Poem of Stone and Bone is a work of memory. In May 2011, this work honored the legacy of James and Janie Washington, Memorial Day, and the 150th anniversary of the Civil War. 4 installations revived key aspects of the sculptor's artistic lineage, melding geography, spirituality, nature, and intellect into a journey across a landscape of time. My residency focused on Mr. Washington's personal history, his images, creative process, and library, highlighting the role they played in forming his artistic practice. The residency had always been about the journey of an artist, each installation symbolizing a formative stage in Washington's life and/or artistic development. I saw layer upon layer of rich and resonant links to the past. For me, the objects were not merely decorative, but signs and signposts pointing to a larger story hidden in plain view. The journey began with this pedestal onto which I arranged rocks, entwining them with a red sequin strand that would thread through each installation, joining one to the other by a symbolic bloodline. For here, by the fence, I learned that stones were delivered and hoisted up and into the studio. I called it the bloodline of time. It led me to discover the sculptural elements of the garden. I imagined its once glorious state, the unruly grass cut and bushes trimmed. That is, after a huge plexiglass sheet that a former resident installed could be removed. Only then could the bloodline begin to bind elements that reflected and corresponded with one another. Wood and stone created conversations of shape, color, and texture, especially when centering that humongous boulder. I called it the Mount of Ascension, placed a small stone upon it, which a previous artist drilled a hole into and ran the bloodline through it. From this vantage point, off in the distance, is the distinct shape of the house. Between the mount and the house, however, is an abode of souls towards which we are headed. When I first peered into the greenhouse, it was a storage space full of old gardening tools and long unused items. Even so, I immediately identified it as a spirit house, in which, with that old rusty plant stand, I could create an altar. Washington reflected the spiritual foundation given to him by his father, a minister. He was also exposed to secular life, especially music. Surely, he must have heard the music that went by the name of rocks, which we now call boogie woogie. The Spirit House was a port of transport. Particular events transported Washington from one stage of his development into another. Here, the pairing of souls, S-O-U-L-S, with souls, S-O-L-E-S, the work would move from a spiritual plane into an earthly realm, for Washington had to deal with the practicalities of making a living. His mother saw to it that his skill as a cobbler would serve him as a way of supporting himself. I scoured the property for stones, especially egg-shaped stones, which were everywhere, and arranged the rounder ones along the perimeter and the oval ones on the rungs of the plant stand. Then there was the quote-unquote studies, works begun and discarded, but clearly birds of stone. I spread broken eggshells on the wooden platform, placed 2 large shields of wood behind it, and painted "The house stands firm on the glass." Through rock and stone, Washington draws upon the unseen possibilities of a mineral material that in our society has lost its mystical function. Rocks are walked upon, used to build wall and edifice, are thrown at one's enemies, dug up, ground down, and cast out. He uses metamorphic rock, composed of feldspar, quartz, and garnet, as canvas and pulpit. Testimony and testament in stone is imbued with the mystery of history and is in keeping with shamanic and Masonic traditions. In Washington's work, we see the cracked egg, ovum, oval opening in a rock, indicative of a transition from one realm into another by way of birth. The element of flight is represented by feathers and leather soles. Threatened by the Klan, Washington's father fled Gloucester and, as I understand, was never seen or heard of again. This led me to think of the plight of the runaway. The last surviving generations of the enslaved were still a vital part of Southern communities during Washington's childhood and into his young adulthood. Surely, there were an abundance of memories of those who were sold off and those who fled, never to be seen again. This sculptor's father left his son with more than a photograph and unanswered questions. His inheritance, an indelible image of what is sacred and what is profane. For a future must be forged, not only in a tender soul, but also in the narrow of the marrow encased in his bones. Verily, a boy must fashion himself into a man who can stand to face himself if no one else. Isn't this what that school of hard knocks taught, with its whiff of bayou on his shoe, a stiff, stalked, chalk white cotton scratchy lettering, drawing blood, marks a sun, flowering beneath endless days of rays? How many a man must come to understand that it is not what you are, it is what you are not. It was unique for a Southern son such as Washington to build himself a personal library of over 3,000 books in his home. I scanned each shelf, seeking insight into the mind of a man through the kinds of books he collected. Then I wrote a poem from those titles using the most resonant lines. There were also some very ornate covers, which inspired me to make rubbings, strung them into strands of prayer flags and hang them above the altar. More significant than the library, however, is that Washington had a structure built that would further support the development of his artistic visions. And yet, while the studio represented present and future possibilities, I saw the stamp of the past throughout the entire landscape, in the house, on the grounds, and especially inside his studio. Mr. Washington's birth year has variously been given as 1908, 1909, and 1911. In the 1930 census for New Orleans, his age is given as 28, which would make his birth year 1902. Gloucester, Mississippi is 25 miles from the Louisiana border, almost a straight shot to Baton Rouge, and was laid out in 1883 in what was then a pine forest where once the Chickasaw and Choctaws ranged. Is this why trees can be found carved into stone? We have eaten the forest, features the deep pass. That pass we cannot get past. For me, the visual code of the objects and artifacts found in the studio was unmistakable. Why wouldn't the owl represent the loss of habitat and the transformation of the land from its ancient origins into a commodity? There were only a little over 1,000 people living in Gloucester in 1910, and less than 1,000 resided there in 1922. Along the rail line headed north were plantations, cotton plantations, especially one belonging to the largest cotton planter in the world. Hence, I claim that dark, thick chain and circle it around the base of the pedestal of a ship, added bones. The bones spell out our destruction, which transformed the land, untold species of plants and animals, and countless unnamed peoples lost to this world. Large skulls adorn the walls. This one takes residence upon a marble tabletop. Creatures, large and small, once here, now gone, were on display, not by me, but by Washington. We are moving deeper into the past with that 16th century Spanish galleon. This ship marks the beginning of the transatlantic trade in slaves. There, the elephant tusk on top of the piano points to the trade called Black Ivory, in which Africans transporting tusks from the interior to the coast were then sold into the trade after delivering their goods. Oh, the sweetness of life, fragile as paper, nowhere to be found in the brittle bitterness of a hive once abuzz with incessant busyness. The hive is almost hidden against the wood-paneled wall. Hanging on the screen, the skin of a huge snake brings to mind the magnificence of a once living creature splayed out beside a time-stopped huge clock signaling the end, the final hour, the final days, D-A-Z-E, of the last days and that last breath of life. Here, among the relics, an unmistakable mourning takes place. Steps away, take a scan of the shelves of a studio library and you're back among the breathing. Take the stairs and there's a light of possibility shining through the window. So much important thinking and work took place in the space above and the space below. So I found it necessary to create something beyond the installations, which would, of course, disappear into the past and become memory. I decided upon a series of collages, made rubbings from the ornate wrought iron found on the property, and created 9 collages, textiles, decorative papers, and Civil War images found in Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper were used to create each collage. Thrive Upon the Rock honors the legacy left by James and Janie Washington, Memorial Day, and the 150th anniversary of the Civil War. The bloodline traveled from the garden through the greenhouse and to the upper level of the studio and ended in a pile of rocks on the studio floor near the collages. Here we gathered as I read the poem of Stone and Bone, composed of titles from books in the Washington Library. Then I asked the audience to participate in the Rock of Remembrance, that is, to write a message of memory on a prayer slip and add it to the tree at the entrance of the studio. It wasn't really the end, was it? This work continues to be a work of remembrance with the publication this year of Poem of Stone and Bone, the iconography of James W. Washington in 14 stanzas and 31 days. It was actually a little more than that, but I really had the month of May for the installation. So at the core of this project, however, is the Washington Library. I began to go through his library and collect titles, create the poem in January 2011. That is, this poem is the foundation of the entire project, Poem of Stone and Bone. And I'd like to read that poem for you right now. Poem of Stone and Bone. Along civilization's trail, something went wrong. What to say if they come in the morning? King's blood royal, monkey on a string, substance and shadow the uncalled, yesterday, today, and forever, bearing witness to the truth. The way of the wizard, mystics, and Zen masters journey into light, souls on fire, born to rebel. Temples, tombs, and hieroglyphs. This is what we found. The unheavenly city, city of the great king, the eternal city, child of two worlds, miracle in stone, born in blood, walking on water, remaking men, jazzmen. 2 or 3 gathered together, 7 came through, 13 against the odds, moving on up, master men, making a go of life. Deep is the hunger in life's springtime, the soul's sincere desire, somewhere to be had. Steer by a star, stars of thought, go up for glory, the crowning experience, the beautiful necessity beyond east and west. Here's how and when his eye is on a sparrow, butterflies and moths, the serpent and the rainbow, the great red dragon coming of age in Mississippi. Here is your war. 4 days, 1,000 days, blind spots, seeds of conflict, the tear in the cup, the yoke, unquenchable black fires, wings of the morning, ravens, crows, magpies, jays lifting as they climb unto the hills. Sir Boss, lame deer, seeker of visions, please don't shoot my dog. Make your own bread and roses from stone, from ether to cosmos, unto thee I grant 7 stars in Orion, the shape of illusion, the magic of obelisk, the edge of infinity, the divine in hand twice sold, twice ransomed. Moon, moon, blood on the moon beneath the stone, the royal path of life, the luminous darkness parting the water. Excuse me while I kiss the sky. This
side of innocence, eyelids of mourning, cosmic magnetism, water and ice, the magic of honey, every living creature, a feast of flowers, the pupil of the eye, the invisible fulcrum in tune with the infinite. This wonder world, library of mesmerism, the uncommon commonplace, murmurs of earth, the incredible egg, the key of the mystery, the great within, the inward sea, the invisible empire. Here I stand beside the still waters, the man who talks with the flowers, the man who found out why the beautiful ones are not yet born. Hear me talking to you. I heard the owl call my name. The forged note, a new song in a strange land. Heat, sound and light, blood, sweat and tears. Answer to history. Let there be sculpture, poems of cabin and field, buried cities, recovered landmarks and surface markings, the evidence of things not seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Carletta, for ending in such a powerful way and giving us entree into your perspective and process for this important project at the James W. Washington Home. And honestly, it's just such a keen reminder that of the interdisciplinary aspect and sort of inherent ethos of art, that as a sculptor, that the core of a project for you at a sculptor's home becomes this particular home. You provide a wonderful example of how the extensive narratives and rich sensory material that can be found at so many HAHS sites, from buildings to landscape to artwork to the ephemera and library collections, which, as you pointed out, provide glimpses into the artist's mind, that these can all serve as catalysts for the active call and response by living artists such as yourself. And it affirms, I think, the critical importance of this material culture that is often uniquely present at these preserved sites to understanding these artists, their lives, and their art in distinct and complex ways. In addition, there is this wonderful permeable barrier between the past, the present, and future artistic expression that is represented by a poem of stone and bone, which is the essence of why so many HAHS sites engage with living artists in this way. And endeavors like this one allow for continued activation of a site while also offering different artistic perspectives, providing new ways to experience the site and its collections, but also for new ways to engage audiences. And what is also so clearly conveyed in your presentation is that sites like the Washington Home offer contemporary artists like you meaningful opportunities to evolve their own practice, all within this historically potent place of creativity where it's just in the intrinsic DNA of the place and it's full of multi-layered meaning and memory. And so both these contemporary types of activations and large exhibitions like Monuments and Myths allow for impactful projects that extend beyond, well beyond the physical barriers of a site, while clearly, I think, as your poem so beautifully illustrates, remain firmly anchored in that place of inspiration. And so as we move into the conversational part of this program, I'd like to invite Reverend Dr. Laverne Hall, Executive Director at the James Washington Home, Dana Pilson, the curatorial researcher and collections manager at Chesterwood, and to invite back Rick Kendall, our presenter, to all join us in this conversation. And if Amy, you could pose first question for our participants.
Yes, thank you to all of you for giving us so much to think about. And following up on Valerie's comments, I'm wondering, both of you have talked about how your projects sort of performed acts of restoration in some sense. You're bringing back a mind, Carletta, you're bringing us into the mind of this artist, and Rick, you talked about the kind of act of restoration that happens and kind of preparing these works for exhibition. And I'm wondering how you relate your projects to that concept of restoration or conservation. What are they doing to kind of keep these artists' memories relevant?
Rick, do you want to go?
Sure, I can go. I mean, you in the basest sense, yes, I think both Chesterwood and Saint-Gaudens, we preserve the memory of Daniel Chester French and Augustus Saint-Gaudens, as well as their artwork. And you sort of hit upon the conservation theme, and you don't want to send your first introductory pieces of art out into the world, into communities that have never experienced French or Saint-Gaudens before, in sort of a piecemeal or haphazard status, or with the collections items not looking their best. So we did do a fair amount of conservation work on our pieces in preparation for this, which was one of the great benefits of doing this traveling exhibition. And during their lifetimes, I think French and Saint-Gaudens were both national figures, but by virtue of the fact that their sites associated with them are New England based, to a certain extent, I won't say that the world has forgotten about them, but they are not nearly the public figures now that they were back in, during their lifetimes. And I think that is often the case with sculpture. People know the pieces from the public squares, but they don't necessarily know who the creators were behind them. And I think part of our effort here is to spotlight not only the people that were involved in making these pieces, and I won't just limit that to French and Saint-Gaudens, because our exhibition spotlights their studio assistants, many of whom came from interesting and diverse backgrounds, spotlights their models, many of whom came from interesting and diverse backgrounds. And so we are sort of conserving this legacy of French and Saint-Gaudens and those who were around them and worked with them as part of this exhibition.
Well, I agree, and particularly in terms of sculpture, just in terms of the art world, and then with the general public, it is hard for people to identify, because they can't take a piece of it home, they can't take a piece of the exhibit home. So it's not unless it's in a prominent public space, then sculptures, I think, are off on this side in this other world. And for a residency at a place like the Washington site, every artist in residence who comes there is not necessarily focused on the site proper. They're focused on whatever projects that they want to execute. There were other people who also took a particular aspect, like one artist created shoes with soles. So she tied into his work as a cobbler. And then as you saw that one artist drilled holes through some of those rocks. But from the first time I set foot, not the first time, because I was there as a meeting and I had never really gone deep into the property. But the first time I did, something just struck me, and I felt that people were kind of missing what was just right there, these objects. I just thought that they were not seeing the connection between these objects and Mr. Washington's life. The last book published about him was in 1989, and it's literally out of print. So he's not top of mind in the general art world, and particularly in the Northwest. People know about him. I can tell you how many people tell me, oh, I remember him. I talked with him. But I felt that when I walked onto that property, that people really needed to know about him, that he needed a wider audience, because he is such a valent man for me. You know, this whole mystical spirituality, the work, you know, all of this. I felt that people really needed to know more about him, and that's what I set my sights on.
Thank you, Carletta. And sort of moving, sort of using that as a springboard. So, and I would open this question also to Laverne and Dana as well. You know, how do you feel these projects, apropos of this sort of restoration or sort of expansion, how do you feel institutionally or personally, how these specific projects have created a sense of larger context or community around the artists that are celebrated at these respective sites? And you know, I might ask Dana first, since you know, you're the other site represented. And you know, how do you feel this project has sort of created a better sense of context or expanded community? And then I'd like sort of Laverne to answer that same question, and then circle back to Rick and Carletta, if we can, for their perspectives on that.
Great. Well, thank you, Valerie. And thank you, Rick, for such a great synopsis of our hard work from the past few years. I think Rick actually mentioned the fact that these works are going to venues in Alabama and Pennsylvania, Iowa, and Tennessee, to parts of the country that might not be familiar with the works of French and Saint-Gaudens, mostly because many of their public monuments are centered in New York and Boston and various other sites, other cities, but really centered in the Northeast. And so this is really the first time that many of the works by French certainly have left Chesterwood. So for us, just the fact that they're leaving the site in the first place is hugely expanding our reach and our audience. And we certainly hope that people who go and visit, let's say, the exhibition in Tennessee, might think about coming to the Northeast and visiting Chesterwood and going up to Cornish to see the Saint-Gaudens site. I'm not quite sure if I just answered your question.
Oh, you did. There is no right or wrong answer. I would say, sort of, it's so interesting when I think about the exhibition, it's about a sort of a pushing out. And when I think about sort of Carletta's work, is this sort of bringing people in and this sort of recentering of Washington. And I wanted to ask you, Reverend Dr. Hall, what this has meant, having the work there, and then now this publication of Poem of Stone and Bone, what this has meant relative to providing a richer context around the Washingtons, and I use the plural, story, but also getting people to the site and engage with site as community. And you can sort of, you know, define community in whatever way you want when you answer this question. So, you know, what has that engagement of an artist resident meant for this sort of context for you as the leader of the site?
First, let me say thank you to you, Valerie, for what it is you have done. Excuse me. Betty, I'm on. I have a very sick sister who's calling me now. But so let me try and answer this as best that I can. You, Valerie, and Carletta have tapped into what the Washingtons wanted and the dictates that they left in their last will and testament, based on his and her, James and Janie's insight, hindsight, and foresight. They wanted to encourage artists and just people to go beyond the book, to go beyond the surface of what it is they see and feel, and really tap into the spirituality. And Carletta has done an exemplary example of that, and that has led us to lay the very first stepping stone into revising the Artist in Residence program and looking at some other ways that we can improve. I have to go because my sister is calling me. I don't know if she's fallen or what, so please excuse me.
You join us when you can, Laverne. Thank you very much. And Carletta, what has it meant for you on that sort of opposite side of that equation to be brought into a place to create engagement there?
Well, I have to tell you, I met with Mr. Washington like in the 1980s, briefly. He said something to me. I didn't know what to say to him because, you know, he was this sculptor. But I feel that it is my responsibility. As I said, when I first saw these objects, I just said I was going to do something with it. And if you read the book, you'll find that out. I was already, I didn't even have the residency then. They were only doing it by invitation, and I wasn't one of the invited. And so I was going to do something anyway, whatever was going to happen, whether I was invited or not, because I don't know, I wasn't going to say I was chosen or what, but I think that with this, I have rekindled his memory, not just for me, but for the Seattle community. As I mentioned, many people tell me, in fact, I'm going to have an event sometime in which I'm inviting everyone who has had a connection with Mr. Washington to get up and give a testimony of their experience and their knowledge. He was always, actually more than one artist has told me, he always encouraged them. They came and he looked at their work. He told them where they thought they were. They encouraged them to keep going. So he was a true community member. He was not just this artist off in his studio working. He was already a community person. He was a Boy Scout master. So all of these facets of him, I think, need to be fleshed out so that not just this community, because, you know, we're way up here in the Northwest. And so we're not, when you look at artists around the country, very few artists from the Northwest have a national platform. But Mr. Washington deserves to have that for his knowledge and for his example, particularly a man, you know, he gave all those birth dates, but particularly for a man who was not coming from an educated background. He is one of these self-made, self-educated people. And the fact that he and his wife built that studio and have left this legacy is an example.
I think that's a very, I think I always say that often people go to these sites to learn about other artists, but also to see themselves in what they are seeing. right? Whatever that means, and it's different for everyone. And I think, you know, you've put a finer point on that, and how, frankly, an artist can be a living artist can be part of that process, and this sort of synchronicity that happens. You know, Rick, I'd love to just have you sort of round out this question before Amy posits the next one. You know, Saint-Gaudens, I would argue, might enjoy a slightly more public profile, given the Shaw Memorial, you know, maybe a little more in the public consciousness than French sometimes, although French is the sculptor of the Lincoln. But I'm curious as to what, and I say the Lincoln, although Saint-Gaudens is a Lincoln. You know, how have you seen, you know, what are your hopes as a National Park Service site for this sort of giving of more of a context and sort of reaching out into community about this work in this place?
No, that's a great question, Valerie. You know, I think we're perhaps somewhat unique as a national park site in that, yes, we are a small site in New Hampshire, and Chesterwood is a small site in Massachusetts. However, French's and Saint-Gaudens' artwork is located in public squares throughout the Northeast, far into the Midwest and so forth. So our resources may be a little more intangible than many other national park sites, where you actually have to go to the site in order to experience it. Our resources spread out around the country and in public squares in different cities and such. And so if I'm not necessarily, I guess, measuring success here by how many people show up in Cornish, New Hampshire. I don't know, Dana, if you're measuring success by how many people show up in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. If we can get 40,000 people coming through the exhibition and leave that exhibition understanding that Augustus Saint-Gaudens created the Shaw Memorial and the Standing Lincoln, and that Daniel Chester French created the Minuteman and the Lincoln Memorial. I think we are coming out of this having achieved a great deal, even if it doesn't lead to more bodies coming through the turnstiles at the two parks. So it remains to be seen. Do I think that no one will show up at our parks because of this exhibition? No, I think we will see more people because they will be introduced to our sites. But I look at the extra people showing up and seeing the sites is kind of the icing on the cake.
Well said.
Well, and that leads me to, I was going to ask you a kind of basics question about how whether there's an expectation that you track impact of this, at your site, have people heard of the show, did it bring them there? And also, are you all doing, outreach about are you participating in the programming that AFA is, for the AFA exhibition? And Carletta, I'd be interested in the same. It sounds like you are kind of you're continuing. Your residency was 10 years ago, but this is an enduring work for you. How do you kind of continue to reach people about your subject? So, but Dana and Rick, yeah, if you could talk about, how you're kind of participating in the programming and tracking who's coming to you.
Well, I can start. I have this right here. We will be selling the exhibition catalog in the Chesterwood bookstore. So we're hoping that even if people have not heard of the exhibition, that they will pick up the catalog, flip through it, get an idea of what is included in the exhibition. Perhaps even it works the opposite direction, where we have visitors at Chesterwood and then they fan out across the country to take in the exhibition if they can get to it. We don't have plans just yet to track visitorship that's related to the exhibition, but certainly a question that perhaps our guides might mention to visitors. I'm not sure if there's anything more anything that's in place to gauge that. And already the exhibition's first venue, as Rick mentioned, opens in just 11 days. But prior to that, both Rick and I and Donna Hassler, Chesterwood's director emerita, we have already participated via Zoom which is fantastic that we have this capability. We've already participated in some just meetings with students down at Auburn University. I know Rick and Donna gave a little presentation with the class, and I talked with a sculpture class. So it has already started. And I know that Rick and Donna as well are going down to Alabama to give a tour in person. So we are engaging with the different sites, and we're available to participate in programming both online and hopefully in person if we are invited. And we're looking forward to seeing the exhibition at all the venues as well.
And I don't have a whole lot more to add there. The Park Service does do a annual survey of a subset of our visitors. And one of the things that is asked is, where are you from? I think it's by zip code or something like that. And how did you learn about, Saint-Gaudens National Historical Park? And I do expect that we might see, more people answering those questions in places near where the exhibition will be traveling in the South and Pennsylvania and the Midwest, and that we may see, some sort of visitation uptick as a result of the exhibition.
Well, we already have one of our online questioners already mentions that that person is in the Southeast, and they are glad they have an opportunity to see the exhibition in the region. So
excellent.
And Carletta, how are you continuing to beat that drum?
Well, actually, because this is the year that the book has just been published, then actually amazingly, I don't know if you know what AWP is. Okay, I can see the blank faces.
well, it's what's the acronym stand for?
Associated Writers Program.
Ah,
Okay.
AWP. It's like all over, it goes all over the country, and it's just thousands of people. So fortunately, AWP was here in March. And so I had a panel with another organization, Caboto Gardens, which has a Spirit in the Stone, their book. And we did a panel at AWP, which was well received. We had our book launch there also. And then I also did a presentation for Seattle Public Library, focusing actually on Mr. Washington's library and public libraries, because let's say even if he was born in 1911, but let's say 1902, that libraries were segregated until 1975. Which is so amazing why he has that library in his home. So there have been events, since March around the book. And I think that that's the most that we can do at this point.
but I think you bring up this point of, again, sort of this creativity and access into these sites of creativity that are not siloed. There are so many ways, as you just pointed out, to blank stares from a series of museum people about all these other creative ways in which to engage and to enact. And now I'm going to get a little more granular, since these are object-based. Interestingly, you activating objects, Carletta, that you responded to on site, while also including, your own making. So I want to, and then the juxtaposition of that, of an exhibition that is bringing works away from original context. So now I'm going to ask some personal questions. Number one, to Dana and Rick, what were some of your, first of all, what is the scope of this exhibition? How many works are in the exhibition total? Because it's a large exhibition. And what were maybe one of your favorite objects that you got to include, or you think people will be interested in learning about through this exhibition? And then for Carletta, probably hard to choose, and you certainly covered some of it. I'll put the caveat, do not choose an object you already discussed in the presentation, is there another sort of object that you engaged with or found that we didn't hear about in the presentation that particularly resonated with you that you would want to share with us? And if not, of course, I cannot put the caveat that you cannot double down on something you already talked about. But I'm curious, I want to get sort of, so much of this is drawing on the collective aspect of these places that retain these particular objects. So first of all, Rick, how many objects in the exhibition? We won't hold you to the specific checklist, but like in a roundabout way, and what are one of the favorites that you got to send out? And then to Dana, and then we'll finish with Carletta, where it sort of becomes more of a personal response to what she encountered.
Yeah, I might have to defer to Dana on the total number of objects, because I think when we started this concept, we said, like 40 objects from Saint-Gaudens and 40 objects from Chesterwood. And that number has moved around a little bit as we were, trying to tell the story and ensure that each of the sections, told the story that we were hoping to tell. So I would say it's somewhere in the 80 to 90 object range, somewhere in there. And then we've added some small things that aren't artwork, like sculpting tools and modeling stands and things like that. So it's I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, exactly how many objects there are, but there's a wide variety. And I would say that one of the objects that I'm really excited is traveling from the Saint-Gaudens collection anyway, is there is a relief that there is only one of in the world of a woman named Louise Miller Howland, and she is depicted by Saint-Gaudens in extremely high relief, as though she is emerging from a fog of bronze. And that piece had been in the hands of the family that commissioned the work in 1884 up until 2019, when it was procured by the Saint-Gaudens Memorial, one of our nonprofit partner organizations and a co-organizer of this the traveling exhibition, and donated to the National Historical Park in Cornish. So it's a piece that has not seen the light of day hardly at all. And we're really excited that we're able to travel it and that people are going to be able to enjoy it on this exhibition.
Well, Rick, you were correct. It's I just looked in the catalog and I see that we have 80 objects. So your number was correct. And I believe we have 38 works from the Chesterwood collection, and peppered in between the works from Chesterwood and the Saint-Gaudens site are a handful of loans from institutions such as the Metropolitan Museum, National Academy of Design, New York Historical Society, and a couple of others. And the scope of the exhibition really includes everything from the smallest artist models or maquettes that were created by both French, and I think there might be a couple by Saint-Gaudens, that are really the artist's very first conceptions. For example, a set of French's maquettes for the 4 continents. The final works are at the U.S. Customs House in New York, but we are traveling 4 very small, about 12-inch high models that really give you not only the hand of the artist, but his original conceptions for the imagery. There's also portraiture, and while Saint-Gaudens is known as a master of portrait of bas-relief, there are also a few examples by French. And there are bronze versions of French's Minuteman, Saint-Gaudens' Puritan, so works that exemplify their civic work, their civic sculpture. And it's just, I think their viewers will find that it's a wide range, and I'm hoping that they will be astounded to see that both French and Saint-Gaudens are much more than just the Lincoln Memorial and the Minuteman and the Shaw and the Sherman Memorial. I think visitors will be very surprised to see the depth of their output. I guess I would have to say I have a number of favorites. I am partial to Carletta, who is on the cover of our catalog. She is derived from French's Richard Morris Hunt Memorial, from the figure of architecture. And I think we were all sort of stunned and surprised to see the new photograph that was taken of her by the photographer hired by the AFA. And I think we were just sort of bowled over by her beauty. And I think we were all in agreement that she belonged on the cover of the exhibition. And I'll just quickly say another favorite that is going out to the exhibition is a work that has really never been seen. Actually, there are a handful of works that have always been in storage for many years. They were recently conserved. And I think my favorite would be a working model of the Jesse Parker Williams Memorial. That is the working model for the final work is in Atlanta, Georgia. So even though I said that French's works are concentrated in the Northeast, that he did do this cemetery memorial for Atlanta. And what's interesting is not only is it a beautiful allegorical female figure, but Jesse Parker Williams had been a Confederate soldier. He had fought on the side of the Confederacy, and French very rarely, if ever, created memorials, monuments to a Confederate soldier. So we find that very interesting, as well as the fact that it's possible, we think that the model who was of Black ancestry, originally from South Carolina, it's possible that she was actually one of French's models for this work. So it's a very multi-layered, interesting story there. It's hard to express all that in 75 words in the label that will accompany the piece, but it is certainly one of my favorites, and we're thrilled to have it emerge from storage where it's been for so many years, beautifully conserved, beautifully photographed, and now going out on the road to meet people in a variety of different places.
And so Carletta, you served almost as you served as curator, visitor, spirit guide.
I know.
to like these objects that I suspect, by contrast, in many ways, were not hidden in non-sight, but hidden in plain sight. So just sort of briefly tell us something, that was just an incredibly powerful object totem for you.
Well, actually, I'm not going to do an object totem. What I'm going to talk about is that, it occurred to me, as I mentioned, that garden, I realized that it was a sculpture garden. I mean, it hit me that the way, I don't think he arranged it, but the way that things were, that boulder and the wood, and then I sort of sprinkled around some, but I said, this was a sculpture garden. The thing is that Mr. Washington had a certificate in landscape. And that's why I kind of joined with the Caboto Garden people, because he has a lot of Asian influences on that property. I couldn't add that into the scope of my work, but I have talked to several people, particularly, I don't know if you know, Mayumi Sudakawa, George Sudakawa's daughter, and they were friends. He and Mr. Washington were friends. And I was saying that there are a lot of Asian influences on this property, and I couldn't take them. And in fact, I don't think I'm, qualified for that. But I said, somebody needs to do this, because there are, objects in the studio or on the studio, these handles, and there's these stones, and there's bamboo. So this Asian influence is prominent on that property also. And I just hope that someday someone takes that on as a project.
So I think some final sort of thoughts about how the work is never done at these sites, because there's always new, I think, avenues of inquiry, as Rick and Dana and you now have all sort of touched upon in this final answer. And we want to we could, continue this conversation, I am sure, for another hour or so, but in the interest of our attendees, we want to wrap up and hope that others who are attending today use all the links in the chat to further explore the richness of these projects and the efforts of our participants today. I think a reminder of how, again, a newer site or sites that have been around for 50 and I think over 100 years in Saint-Gaudens, whether newer like the Washington site or older like the Chesterwood and Saint-Gaudens sites relatively, there are always these new ways to engage and to continue to expand on the richness of these narratives to a wide variety of needs, which is what we've really hoped to try to introduce through this series this year in particular. And I want to thank everyone again for participating. The 2 publication links are in that chat. And as someone who has read the publication, A Poem of Stone and Bone, a couple times now through, I think a really wonderful example of understanding through the artist lens what it means to have opportunities at these sites. And of course, having seen the advanced copies of Myths and Monuments, this is a spectacular catalog and everybody should figure out how to get to one of these venues. And with that, I will turn it over to Amy for just some final comments. Thank you.
Yes, I want to. I mean, I love that we ended this series with the theme of spreading the word, just because you all have really showed us the power of doing that by taking part in this program and through the work that you're doing. And it's been really energizing to think about, what you're doing, is work that any of us could carry over, whether it's through working on a traveling exhibition or working with an artist in residence. Those are both really powerful models. So thank you to all of you for that. And to everybody who's participated in this series and signed up. We're looking ahead to next year, Home Improvement 2024, and we'll gel some ideas about that. But in the meantime, we invite all of you to take part in an upcoming HAHS program, the Road Trip, which will take you to the Kaus Sharp site in Taos, New Mexico, where you can learn about the artist E.I. Kaus and Henry Sharp, who were founding members of the Taos Art Colony. So I'll put a link in the chat about that. And so we'll miss seeing you next week, but look for the follow-up email with those links we've been dropping in today so you can continue to explore, and hopefully we will see you again next year. Thank you to everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.